It was the last round of the late title Tuesday. It's Magnus Carlsen versus Parham Maghsoodloo. The player who wins the game will become the champion of the late title Tuesday. You see, the pressure is building up. In this video, I'm going to analyze their game and try to help you understand the game in the easiest manner and try to cover each and every detail so that if the player would have played their best, the game would have looked something like this. And as I always say, if you really want to become a stronger player, you must analyze the games of the top players, including Magnus Carlsen, of course. So I don't want to waste any further time, let's begin. Magnus is playing with white, Parham is playing with black. It's Title Tuesday, 3 minutes plus 2 second increment. Magnus with white decides to open up the game with c4. Parham replied with e5, the most aggressive way to play against the English. We have g3. Magnus wants to put the bishop on g2, knight f6, bishop g2, d5, striking in the center, which is the best and the most fundamental approach, takes, and now knight to c3. The bishop and knight attacks the knight on d5. So Parham decided to took on c3, bc3, simply capturing towards center, and now bishop to d6. And now Parham wants to simply castle up. Magnus decides to develop the knight, which is the best way. And remember, it looks like black can push the pawn, attack the knight, but it's already a blunder because after queen a4 check, thanks to the queen, it attacks the king and also the pawn at the same time. And on the next move, you're losing a pawn and eventually the game. So after knight f3, Parham decides to castle up. Magnus decides to play the move d3. You can castle up as well in this position, there is nothing wrong. I believe castle is the best move and it is the best move because it keeps the flexibility in your hand. You can play d3 or maybe d4 in the future. You are having option. But instead, as we know, Magnus has played everything everywhere. He decides to play d3, a sideline. And now we have knight c6 by Parham, developing the knight. Makes sense. Magnus decides to castle up. And now h6, a good move by Parham. He's simply pushing up the pawn, trying to take away the g5 square from the bishop or the knight, and there are going to be no back ranks in the future. So h6 is a very flexible move. And now the ball is in the game of Magnus. Now it's Magnus' turn, and now how will you try to continue the possession? First, the question is how will you try to assess the possession? Like, you need to first assess the possession in order to find the best move. After h6, first, as you know, we should always try to finish our development. So the bishop and rook has not really been developed. But to be true, I'm not really sure where the bishop belongs. Maybe on b2, maybe on d2, maybe on e3, I don't know. Or who knows, maybe striking on d4, maybe playing bishop f4, who knows. We are not really sure where the bishop belongs. Definitely the rook can go on b1, that's a good move. But you see, white is having a weakness on a2 pawn. So it's always recommended that whenever you are having a weakness, try to remove that weakness. So a good move would be simply to play the move a4. You're just pushing up the pawn. You want to push the pawn. You want to take a pawn so that eventually you remove your weakness and you're also having the open a file for your rook, which is a good move, which is the best move in the position. And another good move is, you see, the bishop on g2 is kind of blocked by the knight. You see, the bishop would be a good bishop if the diagonal is opened up. And the knight is not really doing anything on f3. So Magnus is like, okay, let me put the knight on d2. I want to play the move knight c4, attack the bishop. You see, black is having the bishop pair. So always, removing a bishop pair is always a good idea. Knight d2 also stopping black from playing the move e4, which is a good idea. And now rook e8. Parham is playing some good moves, just developing the pieces, rook e8. And now Magnus is like, okay, now let me play the move rook to b1. Rook b1 is once again a very good move. You're developing your bishop, you're developing your rook because you're not really sure where the bishop belongs, and the rook is on the open file, which is a good idea. And now knight to a5. Now at the first glance it looks like the knight on a5 is not really doing anything because like the knight is on the rim, which is usually dim. You see, after rook b1 it's already not so easy to play with the black pieces. Why? Because you can't really move the bishop because the b7 pawn is hanging. You can't really push your b pawn because the knight is hanging. And as I'm saying, you want to develop your development. You want to finish your development. So Parham is like, okay, now let me move my knight so that now I can move my bishop. Or at least play c6. The pawn is protected and then I can move my bishop. That's how I'm going to complete my development, which is a good idea. Magnus played a very good move, which is queen a4, developing the queen, also attacking the knight. Parham is like, okay, c6. This is all my idea. I'm protecting my knight with the queen. And after c6, now once again, how will you try to continue the possession? You see, after c6, black wants to play b5, attack the queen and develop the bishop, basically finishing his development. So Magnus decides to play the move c4, which is once again a good move. You are putting your pawns like this in a chain, which is good. And you are also at the same time stopping b5. So Parham is like, okay, bishop d7, and now after bishop d7, I have finally finished my development. My all pieces are developed, and I'm pretty happy. You see, black is not really aiming to push the pawn to c5 because it looks like the queen is attacked, but the bishop, white's bishop would be extremely powerful, the rook is opened up, and c5 is never a good idea. So Magnus decides to play a very good move, which is knight to e4. It looks like the bishop has not really been developed, so let's play bishop a3. Bishop a3 is a move which always definitely comes in my mind. But black is having a very strong move in this position. That's the only reason black is having a good position. Like, it's a minus 1.5. Because black is having b5, which is a very strong move. Because after takes, you will realize the queen is attacked. And the queen is not really having any good squares, so the queen has to go back and you lose the bishop. And black is just a piece up. So that's the reason bishop a3 is already a blunder. You can't really go for it, because b5 is happening up. If b5 was never a move, bishop a3 would have been a fantastic move in this position. So that's why first knight e4, just attacking the bishop, which is a good idea. And now once again, Parham decides to play the move b5 anyways, attacking the queen. And now Magnus decides to go back with the queen. And now here's a position where many beginners mess it up. They're like, okay, b5. Let me do one thing. I'll first take on b5, cb5, and it looks like the bishop is opened up. So now what I'll do here is, now I'll simply go back. But now already queen c2 is not a good idea, because now after rook c8, you see, you are just giving extra moves to black, extra tempo, if I need to say in the chess terminology. Rook c8 just attacks the queen. You see, black is having just free move and black is having a wonderful position. Even if you try to go queen d1, you see, black has developed all his pieces on the king side, on the queen side. Bishop e7. Nothing is happening on this diagonal. I can play rook b8. Black is very healthy in this position with absolutely no problem. And yeah. And Magnus is like, he understands the position. He decides to play the move queen c2. He realizes that if black tries to capture the pawn on c4, first of all, the bishop is hanging, so let's go back. Bishop goes back to f8, which is a good move, because the bishop was hanging. And now Magnus played the move bishop d2, which is a fine move, but not the best in terms of chess strategy. In terms of positional play, a better move would have been bishop e3. You see why bishop e3 is a good move, much better move rather than bishop d2, because after bishop e3, first of all, you need to understand the c6 pawn is a weak pawn. It's a weak pawn. And black wants to play the move b4, c5 in order to convert this weak pawn into a strong pawn on c5. And eventually, black would love to push the pawns on the queen side. And that's a good idea. So after bishop e3, what you are doing is, you are not really allowing black to play the move c5. And you want to trade off the dark square bishop with bishop c5. With bishop c5. And after bishop c5, knight c5, you need to understand the knight would be having like the best square on c5 which is available. And eventually, once you trade off the dark square bishop, the c6 pawn would become very weak in the future. And eventually, you are going to have high chances of putting maximum pressure on your opponent. And if your opponent decides to take on c4, after dc4, you once again need to understand, definitely you are having an isolated pawn, which is bad. But at the same time, black is also having the same. The knight on a5 is simply a bad piece. You are having open b file for your rook. You are having open d file for your rook, which is going to be on the same file as the queen. The bishop is good, the pawn is weak. Definitely this is very good for white, practically speaking up. So that's why bishop e3 would have been a fantastic move in the position. But we have bishop to d2 by Magnus, as it's a blitz game. We have rook to c8 by Parham, which is a good move. You are getting all your pieces. The rook is on the same file as the queen. And now rook to c1. Once again, bishop e3 would have been a fantastic move. And now many players would like to play the move c5 in this position. Yeah. Because after c5, it looks like I can play knight d6. But after c5, you need to understand, now the c6 is weak, definitely, but you can't really attack the pawn because it's already protected by the bishop and the rook. And after something like knight b7, I can already start pushing on the queen side, and black is absolutely fine, maybe even pressing. So that's where rook c1. You see, Magnus understands the position. He's not closing up the position with c5. He's trying to keeping maximum options for him. He can take, he can push, or maybe he can just leave it as it is. Rook c1 getting all the pieces into the game. And now we have knight to b7, going back with the knight, which is a good move. The knight on a5 was doing absolutely nothing. All the pieces have been joined in the game, and now maybe Parham is finally ready to push the pawns on the queen side. And now Magnus decides to play the move bishop e3, which is a good move now. He understands the position that all his pieces have been in the game now. So it's try to improve the position. Bishop d2 is absolutely doing nothing. Bishop e3 attacks the pawn, which is a good move. And after cb5, queen b3, this actually would have been equally better. Why? Though it's very hard to find human-wise, it's an idea of the engine. Why queen b3 is a very good move? First of all, why practically human-wise it's not a natural way to play. Why? Because after queen b3, you understand that black can play knight c5, bishop e6, attacks the queen. And putting a queen on a square where your opponent can attack your queen is definitely not a natural move to be considered. But after queen b3, there is a very deep logic, which is after queen d5. Like, first of all, black can't really play bishop e6 because b5 is hanging. And white wants to play queen d5, which attacks the bishop, which puts pressure on the knight, pawn, maybe knight d6, maybe knight c5. And basically the queen would be fantastically placed on d5, and that's the best score for the queen. Human-wise, it's hard. Bishop e3 is the most human-wise and positionally sound move. a5 because the pawn was hanging. And now we have the move queen to b2 by Magnus, which is once again a very humanish move. You see, all the pieces are now perfectly placed. The only thing that I'm concerned in this position is the rook is on the same file as the queen. So moving the queen makes sense. But here the same idea was working after cb5, queen b3, and d5 square is once again weak and white is better. Instead, queen b2 was played, which is human-wise, I would say, the best move in this position. And now Parham decides to play the move knight d6, which is already not the best way. Like, now he was having an opportunity to gain an upper hand against Magnus by playing the move b4. And after b4, you see, now he wants to play c5, as I always say, removing the weakness. And then after c5, the black can really start going for an advantage by pushing the pawns on the queen side. So I'd have to play the move c5. That's the only way. And now already after f5, a very concrete line, which is, it requires calculation. f5, knight d2, which is the only move for the knight. And now f4, which is a very strong move. White have to take it, and white have to take it. And after knight c5, like, you see, now black is having option. Black can take on e2, black can take on c5. But knight c5 is the best. Because after knight c5, you see, now black is having 3 versus 1 on the queen side, which is good. e2 is hanging up. The knight is nicely placed on c5 now, because b7 knight was a bad piece. Knight a4, knight c3 is coming up, and black is already starting to push, and this would have been a fantastic position for black. Instead of b4, Parham decided to simply play simple chess. He realized the knight is bad, let me trade off the knight. Knight d6. Magnus is like, knight c5, I want to win, I'm going to keep maximum pieces on the board. Bishop goes to f5, we have a trade, and now we have the move h3. You see, Magnus is a guy who likes to keep maximum options for him available. Like, when there are decisions, when he needs to make a concrete move, there are a couple of times when he's not able to make it. So he likes to play the move h3. A better move would have been a very fantastic move and a very positionally good move, which is knight b7. Why? Because you need to understand the pawns on the queen side are extremely weak. The b pawn is generally, for now, it's protected by the knight. So after knight b7, I can actually simply trade off the knights. And now the pawns are extremely weak, and eventually I can put pressure on them, and it's already very hard to play with the black pieces, and white is in the perfect control after rook c1. White is having open c5, the pawns are weak, the bishops are nicely placed compared to the bishops of black. And I'm believing Magnus can really positionally outplay this position in Parham Maghsoodloo. Instead, he played the move h3, h5. Once again, he was having the opportunity of knight b7, but he played the move a3, bishop g6, knight b3. Once again, knight b7 was available. But knight b3, we have a trade, and now e4 by Parham, which is a very good move. He's striking in the center, understanding, like if he opens up the center, the rook would be activated, the queen would be activated. And first of all, after e4, you can't really take the pawn on e4, not because black can recapture it, but because of knight c4. As there is no pawn on d3, the c4 square is very weak. The queen is attacked, and after the queen move, bishop cross a3, and you can just see the position. Black is having 2 pawns on the queen side, and now this is completely winning for black. So it's already hard to play with white now. It's already hard. Black is having more space on the queen side. e4 has been come up. Very hard to play with white. Queen d2 defending the pawn. We have a trade. Knight goes to f5, and now bishop to g5. First of all, you can't really go for capturing the pawn on a5, because after queen a5, knight a5, knight e3, f e3, rook e3, black is having bishop pair advantage. Material wise, it's an even position. The a3 is hanging, d3 is hanging, g3 is hanging, everything is hanging, and that's it. Black is winning. So you can't really trade off the queen. So we have bishop g5, keeping the bishops. Queen d6, which is already not the best way to play. f6 would have been best. The bishop have to move. Maybe bishop f4, and now bishop a3 is fine. It's a good way to continue the position. After queen a5, knight a5, just bishop c1 is hanging, so you can't really go for that. And after bishop a3, you see black is already a pawn up, and black is pretty happy. Instead, Parham decides to play the move queen d6, knight a5, queen a3, knight goes to c6, and a b4, protecting the pawn, pushing up the pawn. Bishop f4, and now black is the one who is playing for the win, because the b4 pawn is very strong compared to the pawn on d3. So we have b3, and now we have bishop to d5, which was not a great idea. And the whole idea of bishop f4 is a good move, because white can play bishop e5 with the idea of putting the bishop on b2. But after b3, Magnus somehow changed his mind with bishop e5, bishop b2, which would have been the best way to continue the position. Instead, he played the move bishop to d5, which is not the best, because now Parham played knight d7, which was also not the best. He's having a very strong move available in the position, which is absolutely genius, which is knight to d4. He wants to trade off the knight, first of all, and he would like to push the pawn. So white have to take the knight, and after bishop b4, you need to understand the queen is not really having any squares available now. Only one square, which is queen d1. And after b2, rook b1, there is a check on e1. You lose the queen, and the game, that's it. That's 0-1. It's very hard to find. It's a blitz game. So knight d7, Parham is like, okay, allow me to trade off the knights. We have rook b1. Again a blunder. Once again, bishop e5 would have been a good move, covering b2 square. Rook b1 was a blunder, and now we have b2, which was once again a blunder by Parham. A very good move would have been bishop b4, as the queen is not really having any squares available, so he has to go on b2. But after rook e1 check, you can't really capture the rook because the queen is hanging. After king move, just takes b2, and you can see how this game is coming. Like, it's all over. d3 is hanging, queen a1 is coming up, and that's it. It's 0-1. b2 was played. Parham is like, okay, I'll give you my b pawn for the d pawn, and now this is a Russian game. Both the sides are having two bishops, equal pawns on the each side, and that's it. That's an equal position. Both the sides try to move the pieces, and you see Magnus is the one who is trying to play for a win. That's of course because he's endgame genius. He's having 19 seconds on his clock. Parham is having 3 seconds on his clock, and now both the sides were trying to maneuver their pieces, and eventually, at a certain point, Magnus tried to push, and now he's finally having a good position. Bishop to d7, which was a blunder. It's +4. Magnus gave a check, the king goes back, and our rook goes to d8. Bishop goes to a5, and this is the moment where Magnus was having only 2 moves to win the game. In the game, we had rook d7, which was a blunder. Now, the only 2 moves which wins the game for Magnus is rook b8 and rook f8. Why? You ask me why? Because, for example, if rook f8, like the idea remains the same, black needs to keep attacking the rook, or else white just needs to move the bishop, and that's a mate. Black needs to attack the rook, and now rook b8. Once again, the only move is bishop to d6, attacking the rook. But after rook d8, you need to understand the two bishops are lined up, both the bishops are hanging, and after you move the bishop, I just take it. Takes, and now white is just a rook up. Going back, the same stuff. White can also play rook b8, bishop c7, rook f8 this time, because once again the bishop has to go on d6, and still the same stuff with white winning completely, a piece and the game. Magnus decides to play rook d7, and once again now this is a drawish endgame. It's a check, king goes up, and now Magnus can just draw the game by trading off the rooks, and that's a draw. Instead he decides to play rook h8, attacking the pawn, and now Parham is a pawn up. That's the sad reality. We have g5, and now just take this, and I believe Magnus can easily hold this position. He decides to play rook h6, which was a blunder, because after rook f4 check, he's losing f5. Parham missed this idea. He pushed g4, and now Magnus once again is having a lifeline. And after rook f4, it looks like black is winning a pawn. Now black would be 2 pawns up, and that would be winning. But actually, in the game we had bishop e3, but bishop d6 would have been best, because after takes, now white is having a very strong move, which is bishop e7, and he can take on f6, which is insane. Black is having two options to take the bishop, with the bishop or the rook. You take with the bishop, I take this, and now this is Magnus knows how to draw this position. It's a draw. And if you take this, just takes, and that's a draw. You can't win. Just rook over here, I play the king, the rook goes back, and now I can just take this pawn, that's it. Instead, Magnus is having only 6 seconds on his clock. He decides to play bishop e3, which was a blunder, because after rook e4, the bishop is trapped. Magnus is losing the bishop. So Magnus has to give up the rook for the bishop, king over here, and a fantastic move to end the game, which is rook to f4. Blocking the bishop out, black is going to push the pawn and win the game. If you take over here, it's winning. Just over here, just push. You go here, I make a queen. You go over here, I can just get the king over here, and I can just take the pawn. And you can't really take even if I can play this, you can't really take this, I can win. That's it. So that's the whole idea. After rook f4, Magnus decides to resign the game, and Parham became the champion of the late title Tuesday. It was a fantastic game played by both the players, and you see how each move makes sense. If you are having a logic, then only you should play that move. Without logic, no player at the very top level is playing chess. That's the only reason they are at the top and you are at the bottom. And yeah, that's how this game was played. And fantastic game. As you can see, both the sides were having their own chances of winning the game. In the end, Parham Maghsoodloo came out on the top and won the tournament. Congratulations to Parham Maghsoodloo. So that's it for this game. I hope that this analysis game helped you to understand the position, understand chess even better. If it did, make sure to like, share, and smash that subscribe button. I'm going to come up in the next video. See you in the next one. Thank you for watching, and bye-bye.